The topic that I will be discussing is all about the radio waves. What are radio waves? Radio waves are type of electromagnetic radiation, best known for their use in communication technologies such as television, mobile phones, and radios. These devices receive radio waves and convert to mechanical vibration in the speaker to create sound waves. The radio's frequency spectrum is a relatively small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum is divided into seven regions in order of decreasing wavelength and increasing energy and frequency. The common designations are the microwaves, the infrared, the visible light, the ultraviolet, the X-rays, and gamma rays. The radio waves have the longest wavelength in the electromagnetic spectrum, according to NASA, ranging from about 0.04 inches or 1 millimeter to more than 62 miles or 100 kilometers. They also have the lowest frequencies from 3,000 cycles per second or 3 kilohertz or 300 gigahertz. There are different bands of radio waves according to the frequency range and the wavelength. Example, extremely low frequency or the ELF, the frequency range is less than 3 kilohertz and the wavelength range is greater than 100 kilometer. The very low frequency or the BLF, the frequency is from 3 to 30 kilohertz and the wavelength range is 10 to 100 kilometer. The low frequency or the LF, the frequency range is 30 to 300 kilohertz and the wavelength range is from 1 meter to 10 kilometer. For the medium frequency or the MF, the frequency range is from 330 to 3 megahertz and the wavelength range is from 100 meter to 1 kilometer. For the high frequency or the HF, from 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz and the wavelength is from 10 to 1000 kilometer. For the ultra high frequency or the UHF, the frequency range is 30 megahertz to 3 gigahertz and the wavelength is 10 centimeter to 1 meter. For the super high frequency or the SHF, the frequency range is from 3 to 30 gigahertz and the wavelength is from 1 to 1 centimeter. And for the extremely high frequency or the EHF, the frequency is 30 to 300 gigahertz and the wavelength range is from 1 millimeter to 1 meter. Okay, so what is low to medium frequency? The ELF radio waves, considered as the lowest of all the radio frequency. They have long range and are useful in penetrating water and rock for communication with submarines and inside mines and caves. The most powerful natural source of ELF and BLF waves is lightning. Waves produced by lightning can bounce back and forth between Earth and the ionosphere. This lightning disturbance can distort important radio signals traveling to satellite. The LF and the MF radio bands include marine aviation radio, as well as the commercial AM or the amplitude modulation radio. AM radio frequency bands fall between 535 kHz to 1.7 MHz. AM radio has a long range, particularly at night, when the ionosphere is better refracting the waves back to the Earth. But it is subject to interference that affects the sound quality. When the signal is partially black, example, a metal walled building such as skyscraper, the volume of the sound is reduced accordingly. The higher frequencies. Higher frequencies such as the HF, the BHF, and the UHF bands include FM radio, broadcast television, sound, public service radio, the cell phones, and the GPS or the Global Positioning System. These bands typically use the frequency modulation or the FM to encode or impress an audio or data signal onto the carrier wave. In frequency modulation, the amplitude of the signal remains constant while the frequency is varied higher or lower at a rate and magnitude corresponding to the audio or data signal. FM results in better signal quality than AM because environmental factors do not affect the frequency that way they affect amplitude as long as the signal remains above the minimum threshold. FM radio frequency fall between 88 MHz and 108 MHz. The shortwave radio. The shortwave radio uses frequency in the HM band from 1.7 MHz to 30 MHz. Within that range, the shortwave spectrum is divided into several segments, some of which are dedicated to regular broadcasting stations. Shortwave stations can be heard from thousands of miles because the signal bounces off to the ionosphere, rebound back hundreds of thousands of miles from their point of origin. Highest frequency. Short, higher frequency, and extreme high frequency represent the highest frequency in the radio band and some and are sometimes considered to be the part of the microwave band. However, their short wavelengths allow signals to be directed in narrow beam by a parabolic dish or antennas, such as the satellite dish antenna. This allow for short-range, high-bandwidth communication to occur between fixed locations. SHF, which is affected less by air, is used for short-range applications such as the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, and the wireless. So this is all about the radio waves. Thank you.